So, good afternoon, everyone. Now, what we're going to talk about today, it's predominantly the period from 1930s onwards. Now, in the last class, we talked about the Great Depression, right, and the Russian Revolution. Now, what we're going to talk about today, you don't have to do much of writing for now. The writing we'll do in the next class. Today is just the storytelling part. But relatively, there are 2 or 3 questions which are important from here that you can write down. One is something which is related to the League of Nations, which is a direct question if they have to give something in the mains examination. If you're writing, if you're writing an essay on peace and something on maintaining international peace also, then United Nations is predated by the League of Nations, which was perhaps the first organization formed for this purpose. So even that, this can be used there as well. So a question like this can be asked also comparing the League of Nations with the United Nations. Okay, as to, so you can write down the question first. To what extent did the League of Nations succeed in achieving its declared objectives? And compare and contrast this with the working of United Nations. See, League of Nations was formed after World War I. As World War II began, or rather one could say come to an end, the League of Nations was dissolved and a new organization, which is the United Nations, was formed. So, and that was also formed with some similar objectives and even broader objectives than the League of Nations. So direct question can come on League of Nations also, or direct question can come on United Nations also. And so that is one thing that we must know. Another question, discuss the factors that led to the outbreak of World War II and critically analyze the role of Western powers that is Britain, France, and Britain, France, and US in the outbreak of World War II. So that's another kind of a question that can be framed directly. So what we basically going to talk about today is firstly the period from 1930s to 1940s, and after that, and to how that led to the breakout of World War II. We'll write about it in more detail probably in the next class. I'm not that well today, so that's why I don't want to stress myself too much, but I didn't want to call off the class also. So what we see is, and okay, before we obviously start discussing this, what we should talk about is the election. Coolest thing ever. I mean, I've not for a decade followed an election as closely as this one. So 7:30 in the morning, I'm sitting, half my eye open, half on the Election Commission's website, and looking at the past 6 hours. But one of the things that you get to know by seeing people tweet on elections, people following and everything, is that it's not about who wins and who loses. That's another matter that we can always play the blame game. Is that we so very know little about the election process itself. So, for example, one of the very simple things, it's not about, the whole EVM rigging thing is all up in the air. It's like conspiracy theories, which can neither be proved nor be disproved. But forget all of that. For example, people follow, if you want to follow election results, that also people follow on news channels. Okay? And these channels are, these channels are not, these channels get to appoint their own representatives in the, in the strong room where the counting is happening. At the same point of time, the Election Commission also updates it on their website. Okay? Now, if you would have followed for 6 hours any news channel and Election Commission's website, they are showing completely very different things. Okay? So, for example, no news channel showed that BJP was leading in less than 120 seats. And Election Commission website never showed BJP ahead in 120 seats ever. Okay, so this happens why? This does not mean that the news channels are lying to you. This only happens because there is every constituency has a number of boxes. One box is opened. So just the very first vote is counted, and they say that this is leading. Okay, so that gives the impression that one is leading or the other is not leading. But if you look, and we normally, when we look at election, at least we as relatively more educated individuals should not look at it like your probably 12-year son, a 12-year kid does. This one this much, this one this much. If you see, both the BJP and Congress have gained vote share from the last election in this election. Both BJP and Congress. Congress gained a bit more, BJP has gained a bit less. But despite an increase in vote share from 47% last time to 49%, almost 1.5 to 2% vote share increase, BJP has lost 16 seats more, roughly on at least 16 seats. So how do you see this? All that is what is, probably the nuance, rather than, they had 116 in the last and now they have 100 or 101. And that is where the explanations lie for a deeper number of things. So, but uska to wo hai nahi. It's all about kisne kya kaha and all that, right? So that's there. Nonetheless, let's aise zyada baat karna वैसे भी allowed नहीं है तो. So anyways, now what we need to do and talk about is firstly, and there is a PowerPoint presentation for this, which I put in all the maps, and I'll use it here also so that you get an orientation. Now, what is happening from the 1930s onwards is that one of the first things to actually know that the League of Nations was formed as an organization in the beginning of 1920 itself. The League of Nations was an organization which had 53 members, and this organization was formed as a part of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And the idea was to form an organization which would prevent the outbreak of another major European war. And this was to be a collective security organization, which at its peak had 53 members. And the aim of this organization was to prevent the outbreak of another major war in Europe. However, what you see that despite Woodrow Wilson himself being a strong proponent, the one who brought this idea forward firstly, who tabled it in the Paris Peace Conference, and who was the strongest proponent of the formation of the League of Nations, United States did not join the League of Nations. And US did not join the League of Nations because the Senate did not ratify the president's proposal. As I told you, if ever probably told you before also, that in US, in terms of foreign policy matter, whether it is ratifying, entering any organization or ratifying any international treaty, the president may make an initial decision, but unless and until it is ratified by the Senate, the upper house or the US Senate, it does not come into effect. Okay, so the US Senate refused to certify the participation of United States in the League of Nations. The League of Nations in this way was to be a transatlantic organization linking the Western European countries and United States in this, and US being one of the strongest powers and one of the foremost proponents was widely expected to join the organization. But the US Senate refused to enter into such an alliance primarily because of the fact stating that that would subordinate US foreign policy to the interest of others. See, US did enjoy a certain amount of isolationism geographically. Okay, so and there is no war which has been fought on US soil except if you would count in the Pearl Harbor attack, okay, in World War II. So before that, there is no no war was fought on US geographical arena. So that was one of the reasons that the US Senate was not very keen into entering into any kind of an alliance which may unnecessarily draw US into a war because of any coalition compulsions or alliance compulsions. If US was to make a decision to enter any war or to support any war, it could do it on a case-by-case basis rather than entering into any such alliance. This was also a part of the long-standing policy of United States as a foreign policy. These are things we'll write later. Okay. For example, the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was given in 1823 by the US President, Henry Monroe. And the Monroe Doctrine basically said simple thing, one of the simple thing, Americas for Americans. The Monroe Doctrine was given in 1823 when Europe and European countries had a number of colonies in North America and South America. Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, all of them had colonies in North or South America. And at this point of time, US intervened and US introduced its own foreign policy, saying that US would not tolerate any European interventions in Americas. US would not tolerate any European interventions in Americas. And at the same time, US would not intervene in European affairs. The idea was simple, that there must be no European interference in American affairs, and Americas, or North and South America, would be the foreign policy backyard of United States. So for example, when you look, we say, in case of Indian foreign policy, that South Asia is India's backyard, right? And that India would probably look with very much concern if there is any outside interference in the region, probably hinting at China or some other factors, right? So what do you see? That, for example, this is something that we see as our own backyard. Similarly, US saw the Americas as its own backyard, clearly pointing out that it would not tolerate any American interference, any European interference in its matters. At the same point of time, US would not intervene in European affairs. So this was a long-standing policy since 1820s, and partly in a continuation with this policy, US said that the US Senate said it would not be wise for US to get drawn into an alliance which would compromise the freedom of its foreign policy. And that is why one of the main reasons why US did not enter the League of Nations. Now, why am I telling you this? Is because this will explain a number of things which are happening later. Now, what is happening in the 1930s is that Japan is another major Asian country. Japan is the Asian country which is by far the most industrialized Asian country, and is also the relatively strongest military power at this point of time. Now, Japan's military supremacy had already been proved in the 1904 war. Japan was the first Asian country to embark on a path of industrialization from 1861 onwards, which was called as the period of Meiji Restoration. There's a mains question. There was a mains question in your examination a couple of years ago, also on Meiji Restoration and its significance. Okay, in Japan. Now, the Meiji Restoration, which began in Japan in 1861, actually was a replacement of the monarchy and was the coming in of the shogunate. Okay, that we'll talk about later again. And from where Japan started towards rapid industrialization. Now, as you start towards industrialization, you need two things: raw materials and markets. Now, Japan was in a search for these raw materials, given the fact that Japan is an island, right? Japan had to import its oil, import its raw material, and also was a land-starved space. Japan is even today a very land-starved country. So Japan was looking for new colonies for raw materials, for setting up its industrial base, and also for exporting its goods. And this was reflected in the fact that Japan in 1904 also fought this war over the issue of Manchuria. And in 1931, finally, Japan is actually controlling the whole region of Manchuria. Now, what is Manchurian region? The Manchurian region is adjacent to Mongolia on the eastern coast of China. I'll show you a map where it's visible. So Manchuria was relatively rich in raw materials, something that the Japanese needed for their industries. So Japan in 1931 invaded Manchuria. Now, Japan's invasion of Manchuria was very important. Why? Because this was the first major transgression. This was the first major transgression that the League of Nations was supposed to speak up on or make up its mind on what to do. The question in front of the League of Nations was, the idea of League of Nations was to ensure non-aggression between member states or non-aggression between member states. So League of Nations had 53 members. One of the first tasks was to ensure that none of the members violate the territorial sovereignty of other members. And at the same point of time, if the members are attacked by any other non-member state, the League of Nations would come together in a joint effort. Now, Japan was already a member of the League of Nations, but Japan itself violated the territorial sovereignty and took over Manchuria. Now, at this point of time, the League of Nations had to make a choice of what is it supposed to do. Now, what you need to know, even United Nations, is that what happens is that if the League of Nations was supposed to do something, the League of Nations had two options: either to try diplomacy or to resort to the use of force. Now, diplomacy was the only thing that League of Nations resorted to, and that too very feebly. League of Nations simply issued a condemnation stating that Japan must withdraw from Manchuria. However, Japan refused to listen to any of the League of Nations statements, and rather itself, it resigned from the League of Nations. And the invasion of Manchuria happened. What is important is that the League of Nations took no military step to discipline Japan at this point of time. Now, the first question that's going to come to your mind is, sir, why is that this is happening? The reason for this is in the weakness of the League of Nations itself. That firstly, it did not have United States. Secondly, when you see is that Germany was not allowed to join the League of Nations till 1925-26. Secondly, what you also see is that Russia, or now what was the Soviet Union, was not allowed to join the League of Nations till 1934. Soviet Union was not allowed to join the League of Nations primarily because of the Russian Revolution and the ideological divide between the West and the socialist communists in Russia. So Soviet Union was not allowed to join the League of Nations. Germany also was not allowed till 1925. US had not joined League of Nations. So the two most important drivers of the League of Nations were Britain and France. Britain and France were the two most important drivers of League of Nations. And as I told you that after World War I, in Britain and France, in both Britain and France, there was a war averse sentiment. I told you that World War I was something that created a domestic opinion in Britain and France and most of the Western countries that there was no use of the war, and that war causes a lot of destruction. So the destruction of the economy that happened after 1919 was itself was one of those factors which was a guard against any adventurous military intervention. If Japan was invading Manchuria, was it of any direct consequence, immediate direct consequence to Britain and France? No. So one of the domestic opinion in Britain and France was not to get involved in wars unless and until it's inevitable or needed. And that is why Japan's action against Manchuria goes unchallenged. US is not a party. Soviet Union is not allowed because Soviet Union could have had a stake in this situation because Soviet Union was the adjacent neighbor. But Soviet Union was not a member of the League of Nations, and so the League of Nations takes no critical stand. That is why we'll say that when the League of Nations had just 50 members, 53 members, but the United Nations formed later had a much bigger membership itself to begin with, 145 nations, today has 190 members. So and that is why we say that more than 190 members, that is why we say that the League of Nations was essentially a British-French affair. Okay? And again, the League of Nations also was not very serious at combating another player, and that was Germany. There was already a realization by the beginning of 1924 within Britain and France that probably they had gone too harsh on Germany in terms of imposing too strict limitations on their army, on their territorial expansion, on the financial penalty that they had demanded from, from Germany. The result was that in 1924, they had what was called the Locarno Treaty with Germany. Britain and France had the Locarno Treaty with Germany. Now, what did this treaty say? This treaty said that Germany would respect its western boundaries as settled in the Paris Peace Conference of 1990. Germany would settle its western borders. The treaty was silent on the eastern borders. The treaty was silent on the eastern borders. Now, if the treaty was silent on the eastern borders of Germany, what did this mean? In the treaty, Britain and France said that Britain and France and Germany agreed to one thing, that Germany would respect its western borders with France, with Belgium, and with Netherlands. But the treaty was silent on the eastern aspect of Germany. What this meant was that this was an indirect opening given to Germany. That if Germany wanted to expand territorially eastwards, it could do so. This was not explicitly said, but this was the implicit thing. But why would this implicit thing be said about, or this implicit offer was being given to Germany? This was being given to Germany because in the east is Russia, and Russia is communist. So one of the game that begins here also is the policy to relax the restrictions imposed since the Treaty of Versailles, primarily on the eastern side, which could allow Germany to territorially expand on the eastern front and at the same point of time limit the influence of communism in the region or the expansion of communist states in the region. Okay, so and thus be a major challenge or thus be a major hedge against communism in the region. And that is also one of the things that we'll see play out more in the 1930s. So the beginnings are visible in 1920s itself. 1929 is the Great Depression. Economic crisis worsens across Europe. And again, so in West Germany, in Britain and France, again, war fighting is not something that is seen as a very good option. If your economy is already in the doldrums, you are still not completely recovered from the destruction of the previous war, the economy suffers a major crash. That's not probably a very good time to fight a war. Okay, so that's there. And so what is happening is in 1931, when Japan invades Manchuria, there is, except for some hue and cry, there is no decisive military action which is taken. And Japan's invasion of Manchuria goes unchallenged. The next is Italy, and Italy's invasion in 1935 of Ethiopia or Abyssinia. Okay, and Italy's invasion of Ethiopia happened in 1935. Now, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia is keenly watched by whom? Hitler. Hitler has just come to power by 1934, finally consolidated his old emergency, everything. And now he is looking at Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. Now, Italy invaded Ethiopia. And again, there was a criticism by the League of Nations, but the League of Nations did not resort to any military action against Italy. And again, the fact that the League of Nations took no decisive action against Italy was again a reflection of the fact that the League of Nations was probably not very serious in upholding its mandate, or it did not have the political will to back its word. Mere criticism was not enough to prevent Italy from invading Ethiopia, which it went on, and despite international pressure, continued ahead and completely took over Ethiopia as its colony in the region. And Mussolini's action are closely watched by Hitler as soon as, and he's coming to power by 1934. By 1935, the first thing seeing Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, what he does is he starts increasing the strength of his army beyond 1 lakh. He started remilitarizing the Rhineland region, or the Rhineland region between France and Germany. He started reinstating the military in the region. This was a clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. But the British and the French still took no actions. Now, in 1936, seeing Italy's takeover of the region in 1935, and by 1935, he's also starting the rebuilding of the German Air Force. The German Air Force, which is going to play a very important role in World War II, is again reinstated by Hitler, which all is a clear violation. Now, by 1937, what is happening are a lot of things. In 1937, and I'll draw a timeline in a while that you can draw. And by 1937, there are a lot of things which are happening. In Asia, Japan, after taking Manchuria, now has taken the eastern portion of China. And this in 1937 is what is called as the Nanjing Massacre, or the Rape of Nanking. Nanjing is a port region on the eastern coast of China, adjacent to the Manchurian region. I'll just show you the map so that later you'll have no confusion. So, if you see the map, that's 1931 is the takeover of Manchuria, which is followed by in 1937 with the takeover of Nanking or Nanjing, both the names it's used. Now, this is considered one of the major aspects, which is the beginning of World War II. When did World War II began? It depends on where you're looking. If you're looking at Europe, it's beginning with the invasion of Poland in 1939. But if you're looking at Asia, the whole process, one could say, began in 1937 or much before in 1931. You can go as back as you want. So there is nothing like, the war began when. Okay, so please don't ask that question that, sir, war kahan chalu ho raha hai? War to ho raha hai. Aapko jahan se manna hai, wahan se maan lijiye, chalu ho raha hai. Okay, so in Europe, it's beginning with, formally with the takeover of Poland, or around Poland, but here in Asia it had begun much before, from 1931, and then later from 1937 onwards. Now, what you see is, why is this happening is again because of the whole raw material thing and the search for markets. Now, why is this war important is because within a span of 2 weeks, more than 3 lakh Chinese people had been killed in this war. That's a huge number, given that Japan's army was relatively small, but they were brutal. At the same point of time, Japan was accused of severe human rights violations in this case, where a number of women, etc., were raped and children. And that is why this is also called the rape of Nanking, where mass rapes were used as a warfare strategy by the Japanese. That is why the Chinese and the Japanese have such a long history of conflict. It's not just about territory, it's also about the way the territory was captured. Okay, and so this is what is happening in 1937. At the same point of time, seeing what is all happening around himself, Hitler has already started violating the terms of Treaty of Versailles. And what he starts from 1937 is again a quick violation even further. The first thing that he does in 1937 is unites Germany with Austria. Austria and Hungary had been separated after, had been split into two after the Treaty of Versailles. Now, and after the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Saint-Germain, etc., one of the conditions also was that Germany would not unite with Austria. But Austria had a significant German-speaking population. Hitler's idea was simple. Wherever there are German-speaking people, we will unite them into one area. And that is what he does, is that he unites with Austria, or annexes Austria. The way you want to say it depends on from which perspective you are looking. That there was the Nazi party in Austria as well. The Nazi party in Austria supported the unification with Germany, whereas the Western powers termed this as an annexation, even though there was a certain amount of constituency in Germany which supported this, certain amount of constituency in Austria which supported this unification or annexation. It's one and the same thing. But more importantly, again, the League of Nations takes no actions. Austria is where? Austria is not on the western border. The next thing that Germany now decides is to take over what? Is to take over the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. Now, Czechoslovakia as a nation was formed also again after 1919. And it had, and this Czechoslovakia region was, in the Czechoslovakia region, you see the western portion of Czechoslovakia was adjacent to, the western portion of Czechoslovakia was adjacent. You can see this will explain. The western portion of Czechoslovakia, that's adjacent to Germany. And the western portion of Czechoslovakia was the Sudetenland region. This Sudetenland region was, can you see that in the map, everybody? That's the Sudetenland region. The western portion of Czechoslovakia was the region which was, again, German-speaking population and was willing to unite with Germany, and more importantly, Hitler wanted to take it. So Hitler announced this decision that he would soon want a takeover of the Sudetenland region. But Czechoslovakia as a nation had been formed after the Paris Peace Conference with an assurance from Britain and France. At this point of time, if Britain and France were not to say anything, even on a takeover of part of Czechoslovakia, then that was a huge credibility gap about the foreign policy of these countries. And that is why you see that a conference was held. The conference said, and this was the Munich Peace Conference. The Munich Peace Conference saw Hitler, saw the British and the French prime ministers sitting together to probably chalk out peace and settle the question of Sudetenland of the Czechoslovakia region. Now, and this is what Jawaharlal Nehru called a great betrayal by friends in the foreign policy arena, in the context of Czechoslovakia. That rather than securing and rather than pushing in troops or any kind of a resistance to secure Czechoslovakia's border, Britain and France convinced, or rather told coldly to Czechoslovakia, that you should give over the Sudetenland region to Germany. And Germany should in return give an assurance that there would be no further annexations that would happen. And this was seen as a great betrayal in the sense that rather than ensuring a rule-based international order, they were pushing forward a compromise which was likely to either embolden Hitler's claims or Hitler's attempts further, and more importantly, was violating the League of Nations central mandate to protect the territorial sovereignty of its member states. And Czechoslovakia was a member state of the League of Nations. So what you see is that now by 1937 end, by 1938 beginning, Germany takes over the Sudetenland region. But this does not stop Hitler. And the very next thing that Hitler does is that in 1938, 6 months, in 1938, this whole peace, the Munich Peace Treaty lasted only for 6 months. Because Germany gave an assurance that it would not annex any other territory except the Sudetenland region. But 6 months later itself, Germany broke the Munich Treaty and annexed the whole Czechoslovakia. Okay? And even then, you see that Britain and France took no major decisive actions, being the principal members of League of Nations. But again, the question arises, why? Because from 1934 and even much before that, Hitler had clarified and openly stated that he was strongly anti-communist, and that with the Night of Long Knives, they had eliminated or had strongly went against the communists within Germany. Now, Hitler was a declared and strongly professed anti-communist. And this anti-communism was very attractive to the West. And this is why one of the things, and you see that Hitler is not violating the Locarno Treaty. Whatever Hitler is doing on the eastern border, whether that's Czechoslovakia, whether that's Austria, or or it's the Sudetenland region, Czechoslovakia or Austria. All of them are on the eastern border. Nothing is happening on the western border. So he's indirectly obeying the Locarno Treaty and expanding whatever he has to do on the eastern side, and he's strongly anti-communist. And more importantly, one of the most important things also is that Britain and France have no appetite for a war which does not directly affect their interests. All of this was the reason why they are not doing anything at this point in time. And we'll talk about this later when we'll write answers in the form of policy of appeasement and the reasons behind the policy of appeasement. So when we're talking about Britain and France's role in the build-up of World War II, we talk about this policy of appeasement and the multitude of reasons which guided Britain and France into adopting this approach towards Germany. Rather than cracking down on Germany for violating the Treaty of Versailles, they were either ignoring Germany or Italy or Japan's aggressions, or were trying to buy peace, as you see in the Munich Peace Conference. And none of them actually, did maintain stable peace, as we know that World War II broke out soon. But what do you see? And so, if by 1938, if Germany's expansion eastwards is not being challenged by Britain and France, then why all of a sudden that when Germany started attacking Poland, Britain and France declared a war on Germany? Okay. So it's important is that because in World War I, it was Germany who declared war. Here, it's not Germany who's declaring war. It's Britain and France who are declaring a war on Germany on the takeover of Poland region. Okay. Now, what is to be understood here is that till 1938 end, Germany was openly and a strongly anti-communist state. And they always said that communism is a disease. We'll wipe it out. Okay? But, and this is why you should understand, political turnarounds are something that are not uncommon. And history will tell you that as strong a turnaround you want, it can happen. You just need to have one thing, faith in your leader. Okay? And Germany had faith in its leader. So Hitler in 1938 end and the beginning of 1939, by that time, after he has taken everything else, and the last thing that is left is Poland. Now, one of the things that Hitler realizes is that the Soviet Union of 1939 is not the Russia of 1916. In the sense that Russia under Stalin had underwent rapid military as well as economic development. The Russian economy and the Russian military was not as poor or as weak as was in the case of World War I. anything that is happening on the eastern side, which is enough to provoke Russia into a war, is probably not a very wise strategy. Okay, so what is happening at this point of time is that in the end of 1938, Hitler does this great turnaround where he signs a secret treaty of non-aggression with Soviet Union. A treaty of peace and non-aggression he signs with the Soviet Union, and this that Britain and France feel betrayed. Britain and France feel betrayed because they had reared or allowed German expansion because they were strongly anti-communist. This was like, हमने आपको पाल पोस के इस दिन के लिए बड़ा किया था कि you go and sign non-aggression pact with Stalin. Okay, so Hitler signing a non-aggression pact with Stalin was a big blow to Britain and France, because Britain and France had also defended their non-action against Germany because of the Germany's stated anti-communist position, and the Germany was a strong could be a strong associate in the fight against communism. But Germany signing this non-aggression, was something. Germany signing this non-aggression with the Soviet Union was something that did not go down well with Britain and France. And on top of that, both of them now had also decided that Germany would take West Poland and Soviet Union would take East Poland. West Poland is all Germany requires to unite with what? East Prussia. This is East Prussia. You know, as I told you in the League of Nations, this is what is East Prussia. This is the Polish corridor, which had been carved out after World War I. Now Germany says one of the simplest things is we will take East Poland, we'll unite with East Prussia. That will increase, you see, Germany's territorial extent in contiguity, bringing all German areas together, and you can keep Poland, or you can keep East Poland. And Germany and Britain Soviet Union and Stalin are happy with this. And as soon as Germany starts the annexation of Poland, you see Britain and France said that we are coming to Poland's rescue. And Britain and France came to Poland's rescue, and you see the beginning of World War I. But then again, the question that World War II, but then again, the question that emerges here is that when Britain and France decide to take down on Poland, or take down on Germany, this is something that Germany is at war with whom? Germany is at war with Britain and France. But we know in World War II, Soviet Union was also on the sides of, Soviet Union was not on the side of Germany. In fact, World War II, half the soldiers who died in World War II came only from Soviet Union. Of all the people who died in World War II, Soviet Union accounted for 50% of the deaths. Okay, the Soviet Union was the principal reason why Hitler lost out. Okay, Russia ने बहुत लोगों को बचाया. If Russia would not have been there, probably Napoleon may not have faced the kind of defeat he faced. Okay, and both in World War I, or more importantly in World War II, Russia actually, or Soviet Union, played a very important role against Germany. But here they're signing the non-aggression with Germany. Both of them also agreed to take parts of Poland. Then why again a turnaround in 2 years? By 1941. By 1941, you see that this non-aggression thing also was done away with, and Russia or the Soviet Union also joined the war. So we'll talk about that also in a minute. So one of the things is that when we talk about, and you know, when we look at history now, it's and Hitler's whole genocide against the Jews had begun actually from 1934 itself. Once he concentrated power in his hands, from 34 itself, the whole clampdown on Jews, their marking, their extermination, their being sent into the labor camps and death camps had begun 1934, 35, 36 onwards. But in 1938, the British and the French Prime Minister are coming to Munich in Germany, sitting with Hitler and saying that we are signing a peace treaty with Hitler. And when you read World War II history now, Hitler is the evil. Hitler is the devil. And everybody else is a saint. Okay? But everybody else, including Britain, including France, including Stalin, all of them had at some point signed a deal with Hitler. So one of the things is that if you win, you get to write history. Okay, so that's there. Now, this is not to say that Hitler was not bad. Hitler was surely bad in terms of his racist approach and everything. But what often gets negated is what Britain and France did from 1930s to 40s. That is why the question I gave you, that critically analyze the role of Britain and France also. Yes, one of the key reasons when we write about reasons of World War II, we'll write about the aggressive agenda of Germany, but we'll also write about the passive approach of Britain and France, the failure of the League of Nations, the pursuit of a policy of appeasement, and significant violations that happened throughout the 1930s but were unaccounted for. All of this emboldened Germany, and in 1936 itself, Germany and Italy and Japan had formed what was the Axis. And this is what they called, this is where you see the Axis powers coming up. In 1936 itself. Because by 36 it had become clear to Hitler कि हमारा बड़ा भाई Mussolini, okay, because he thinks the way we think, he is also ready to take to go ahead with territorial expansion, and we are also ready. And so what you see is that Italy focused upon North Africa, Germany focused upon its expansion in Eastern Europe, and Japan focused upon its expansion in Asia. Okay, and Japan gave the slogan Asia for Asians. Okay, so that is no other power except Asian power must rule Asia. So all of this is giving, and where you see is the breakout of World War II with this. Now, what is happening in World War II? Let's talk about that as well. Okay, and then we'll write some broad things as a timeline so that you have all the events in a timeline manner. When the war breaks out, the war is on the Western Front. But when the war breaks out, the war is on the Western Front, not initially on the Eastern Front. Dekhiye, in World War I, the war broke out on both the Western and Eastern Front. That was one of the bigger challenges for Germany to handle. Now, the war is happening only on one front, and that is the Western Front to begin with in 1939. At this point of time, Germany starts, and if Germany was facing the war only on the Western Front to begin with, it was relatively easy for it to handle the situation. Within a span of 9 months, Germany resorted to the use of its air force that it had started building up from 1934-35 itself. And within a span of 9 months, you see that they resorted to what was called the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg strategy basically was a very simple strategy. That firstly, the fighter planes would carpet bomb wherever the armed forces have to move in. So first the Air Force would clean the area by a mass bombing in that territory, and then the army would move in quickly to take over the area. And that is something that they resorted to, and within 9 months, they took over France, they took over Belgium, and they took over Netherlands. Meaning that they had almost a complete control of France at this time. Now, by 1940 mid, इसको आप Indian history से आप relate कर सकते हैं more. By the mid of 1940, now France had been undone by Germany, and now became what was one of the most famous battles, and was called the Battle of Britain. Okay, mid 1940 to 1941, for 10 months or 12 months to be more precise. You see that and अगर आप थोड़ा सा भी आपको इंटरेस्ट है, जैसे आपने वो पिक्चर देखी होगी, yeah, Dunkirk, but that's about World War I. But that's probably what is important to know is that in terms of dogfights, this was considered the beginning of the dogfights in terms of the Air Force. And you see, this was the Battle of Britain was considered. आपने वो T-shirts देखी हैं? Keep calm. That T-shirts or that whole thing started in the Battle of Britain. 1940 was the Battle of Britain, where the German Air Force, or the Luftwaffe, was pitted against the Royal Air Force. And this was considered one of the major battles, where in 10 months, left, right, center, Britain was being bombed by the German airplanes. London was continuously being bombed by the German airplanes, and the Royal Air Force was putting up a good show, but it was clear that it was not able to prevent the constant onslaught from Germany. That is when the Queen issued this statement, "Keep calm." And that is where you see that they had put in a number of public posters to appeal to the people and make them realize that they're not losing the war. Okay, and Winston Churchill is in place at this point of time, and you see that almost for a year there was a deadlock. Though Germany could not defeat Britain, Britain also faced severe destruction of life and property, including in London, because of this constant bombing. And for almost 12 months, you see that there is nothing major moving except that the war went on. But this was a deadlock. By 1941 mid, Hitler had realized that defeating Britain was probably easier said than done. Okay. But at the same point of time, Britain was also not able to completely destroy the German Air Force. And now Hitler says that we already have France here, Belgium, Netherlands, and that much nobody is taking away. The stalemate is over Britain. तो हम Britain को बाद में निपटते हैं. Right? So let's stop here. They said that let's stop the bombing. And you see that once this bombing stops, he says, let's go where we are supposed to go more. East. हो गया, France आ गया west में. अब जाना east. Okay. So now 1941, what Hitler does is that he violates the non-aggression pact that he had with the Soviet Union. Violation of the non-aggression pact meant that he was launching out the war with Soviet Union. But what is important is that Hitler is relatively smart, and so he's already taken the western side. Now he's focused only on the eastern front. And Soviet Union had initially not joined the war with Britain and France. The war had started in 1939, but Soviet Union did not join until 1941. It is only when Soviet Union is attacked that it is joining the war. And now that Germany is attacking the Soviet Union, Britain and France are happy. They're like, let's wait. This is the time that we had reared Germany for so long. And now, as Germany opens the eastern front of the war, Britain and France go slow on Germany. And Britain specifically pulled and did not push in any more troops in the war on the western front. This does not mean that the war on the western front had come to an end. But Britain is not pushing in any further troops. Okay, why? Because Britain says that let's reserve it when we need it at a later stage. Neither the Air Force nor the British Army was being pushed in, and they held on. US also is not sending any troops till now. And so what happens is that this is something which is happening, that Germany opens the war on the eastern front, and Soviet Union is now willing to join hands with Britain and France. Britain and France say, we are willing to join hands. Britain and France joined hands with Soviet Union, and as Germany opened the war on Eastern Front, Soviet Union was facing the brunt of the German aggression. But the Soviet army was also relatively pretty strong. It was not something which could be easily defeated. Though Germany, by the end of 1941 or by the beginning of 1942, you see, is making certain aggressions or certain, certain expansion even in West Russia. Or in the eastern territory of Russia, in the eastern territory of Germany, you see that in this region, the Latvia-Lithuania region, Germany is expanding. And this is the time where you see that one of the, again, there's a movie, I think 10 years ago on this, and it's a pretty good movie. There's a sniper movie, right? I'm forgetting its name. But about one particular Russian sniper and he basically himself actually killed more than 1,000 people. Okay, sniped them out. Okay, I'm forgetting his name, but the Battle of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Leningrad was one of the most important battles in World War II on the Eastern Front. Because as you'll see, I'll show you this on the map so that would be easier for you to relate. So if you see the German expansion as it started eastward, you see the Battle of Leningrad. This was the most important battle on the Eastern Front, after which Germany started suffering a decline. This was the battle where Leningrad as a city, and there have been numerous war movies made on this war itself, this battle itself. And this battle was one of the most defining battles because Germany could not proceed beyond Leningrad because of the stiff resistance offered by the Russian forces. Now, Russia had devised a new strategy by this time because they followed the strategy of first bombing using the airplane and then pushing in their army. So the Russian army had devised a very simple way, an ingenious way, and that was the hugging exercise. The simple idea was that stay as close to the German troops as possible, so that if the German bomb, the Germans kill their troops as well as the Russian troops. And again, one of the reasons why Germany actually got defeated on the Eastern Front was because of this hugging exercise. Secondly, because even Russia's or the Soviet Union's army was not a small army or not a weak army at this point of time. And thirdly, also because of the Russian winters, which broke the supply lines of Germany to Leningrad. And that was enough to starve off a number of German soldiers. So all of this became a reason why Germany could not proceed on the Eastern Front. But from 1941 end to 1944, for 3 years, it was only Soviet Union which was fighting, predominantly Germany. And though nominally the Allied powers were together, or though nominally on paper, yes, the Soviet Union was there with Britain and France. And Britain and France were fighting Germany on the Western Front, but they did not push in any troops. Hitler gave formal requests to Britain and France to push in additional troops on the Western Front, and so that German aggression on the Eastern Front is slowed. But rather than doing that, Britain and France did not push in any additional troops for the next 3 years, maintaining their military presence on the Western Front to the minimum. This caused a huge resentment to Stalin, and Stalin said that this displays the evil intentions of the Western powers. They are not honest about the German threat, and they want to bleed the Soviet Union as much as possible. So this is something which goes into United Nations formation. This is something that begins the Cold War after World War II. Okay, so we'll talk about that again later. So that's something which is also happening at this point of time. Now, that is something also which is happening at this point of time. Now, this is what is happening in Europe. But there are a lot of number of other things which are happening. One is in Asia and the other is in North Africa. Italy is in North Africa and in Asia is Japan. Now, in Japan's involvement, or rather the US involvement in World War II actually started from, or military involvement of US in World War II happened only in 1942. Okay, and military involvement of US starts after what we often very popularly known as the Pearl Harbor attack. But there is a history even a bit before that. That by 1940, what was clear was Japan was a very major aggressor, unlike any other in Asia. And Japan's expansion in Asia was brutal, was fast, and was aggressive. And to that extent, that Japan had even started, that Japan was not just had taken over, East China or Manchuria, but had also taken on the French Indochina region, the Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam region. Also, Japan was even in the process of taking over Philippines. Okay, and Philippines was also being threatened by a Japanese annexation at this point of time. More so, Japan even threatened to take over what? To take over Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand were Commonwealth, or were a part of the Commonwealth, and they had already their troops involvement in World War II on behalf of the British. Okay, so given that Australia and New Zealand were also involved in the war, you see Japan was keen even on taking Australia and New Zealand. But at this point of time, what happens is that in the beginning of 1941, the US, the United States, firstly cracked down upon the oil imports of Japan. See, the whole paranoia that you see in the South China Sea, okay, over the safety and security of sea lanes is not an unfounded one. History has shown many a number of times that this has happened, that enforcing some kind of a naval blockade can be done. And you obviously are going to read about the Malacca Strait, String of Pearls, all of that later or in IR. But what you see is that if the Malacca Strait is a major choking point, right, that is there in the Pacific region, what is to be understood is that on the East Pacific, okay, which is the Pacific Ocean region, in the middle of Japan and United States, you see Japan's oil imports used to come from that route. And majority of Japan's oil imports used to take the route coming through the Pacific Ocean, not through the Indian Ocean, but through the Pacific Ocean. And US enforced a blockade on these oil supplies to Japan. And Japan, being obviously completely dependent upon imports, saw this as an act of aggression and as a call for war. And so this was primarily done by US to slow down things, aggression of Japan. But Japan saw this as an act of clear aggression, because enforcing an economic blockade or any kind of a blockade is an act of war. War does not mean only when you fire weapons. Okay, so that was an act of aggression, and Japan said that we will probably send a message out to United States that this would not be tolerated. And probably this was the only time in world history in the past 100 years that you see an attack on US bases. That the US naval bases on December 7, 1941, the US naval bases in the whole Pacific region were simultaneously attacked by the Japanese Air Force. And this, for example, the Guam Air Base, and also, for example, this Pearl Harbor Air Base at Hawaii, all of them were simultaneously attacked. And though the Pearl Harbor received the largest attention, because this is the largest, because in which the largest number of civilian and the soldiers died, that is where you see that this is the justification given by the US Senate for a full-scale launch of military operations against Japan. US major involvement of troops was not in Europe. US major involvement was in Pacific. Okay, it's not in Europe. In Europe, their involvement of troop is only after 1942, and that too is marginal. But in Pacific, their troops were involved. And this is what is the island, and you see that now one of the things is that what is happening in the Pacific is one of the biggest battles. देखिए आपके exam के लिए, if you have to write answers, you must know one or two major battles on the Western Front, one or two major battles on the Eastern Front in Europe, one or two in the Pacific region, and one in the North Africa region. That's more than enough. आपको battles के नाम याद रखने में कुछ prize और number नहीं मिलने वाले. It's just that you have to broadly know. Okay. So in the Pacific, you see the Battle of Midway. Midway was midway between Japan and US. Okay. So the Battle of Midway was one in which the Japanese Navy was thoroughly challenged by the US Navy. And this is the battle that is happening in 1942-40 by 1943. And I'll just show you that on the map. Then it will become clear. Okay. So if you see this map, what you again see is that the Battle of Midway was a very important battle because the Japanese Navy suffered a major setback in this battle. Now, Japan had followed what was called the island hopping strategy. The understanding and the approach was simple. Take one island at a time. Now, one of the things is, why are these islands important? These were islands, for example, there are a number of islands there. Okay, and all these islands, most of these were uninhabited, or very few people lived. And it's not that they are annexing it for oil. Okay, वो economic वाला aspect अलग है. लेकिन why they are very keen on getting a control of these islands, both Japanese as well as the Americans, is primarily because no bombers at this point of time had the range that they could go from Japan, say, to the Americas, or no American bomber could go without refueling to Japan. So one of the things was that they needed islands in between where they could establish their military base, could do refueling, could maintain troops as well as the naval section. So that is why they had huge strategic importance if anybody wanted to dominate these ocean, the Pacific Ocean, one had to have the control of these key islands. Okay, so that is there. What is happening at this point of time? So Japan was trying to take control of these islands, and so was the United States. US adopted this strategy of island hopping, trying to take back the control of one island at a time from Japan. And you see that this is something that goes on from 1942 to 1945. Okay, so that's something which is going on in the whole Asian theater of the war. Finally, what is happening in the last theater of war? Three theaters are there. One is the European theater of war, one is the Asian theater, and the other is the North African theater. In the North African theater of war, the war is over what? The war is over Egypt, the Battle of Egypt. Okay, that in Egypt, in North Africa, there was a key battle that was going on between Italy and the Western powers. And this is predominantly because Britain had a colonial presence in Egypt. And Egypt was adjacent to whom? Map देख लिया करिए, उसका जरूर देखिएगा. देखिए, one of the things is, I'll tell you, is जितना भी आप IR में जो भी पढ़ रहे हैं, उसके maps जरूर देखते रहिएगा. Because it's, and I'm very sure सर आपको दिखाएंगे भी obviously. But आप खुद भी सर देखिए जो क्लास में हो रहा है उसके ऊपर आपको जो करना है वो यही है कि जो क्लास में उसको और डिटेल में जाके देख लीजिए. So because if you look in your prelims examinations, a number of these questions which have been asked in map manner, indirectly or directly, is only about strategic areas, etc., which is important for you, has been in discussion in IR, but आप कभी map नहीं देखते. Repeatedly question about, twice there has been a question about the whole Syria map, something around Syria and Israel. Okay, so they don't ask you questions. They're never going to ask you a mains question on what is India's stake in Syria. The question may be about West Asia in general, but in prelims they can ask you this. Okay, for example, they asked that which of the countries once was surrounded by the Black Sea on the one side and the Caspian Sea on the other. Okay, so only if you've seen the map, आप अगर इस एरिया का तो आप देख पाएंगे. आपको वही एरिया के मैप देखने की जरूरत है जहां पे कुछ या तो बिग जियोपॉलिटिकल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है या इंडिया के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है. प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन 2014 मैप बेस्ड क्वेश्चन जो था वो ये था. व्हाट वाज द क्वेश्चन? द क्वेश्चन वाज अरेंज द 3 cities इन द मलक्का स्ट्रेट इन ऑर्डर फ्रॉम नॉर्थ टू साउथ और साउथ टू नॉर्थ. यही क्वेश्चन था. आपको मलक्का स्ट्रेट इसलिए इंपॉर्टेंट है बिकॉज ऑफ स्ट्रिंगर पुल्स. सो एनीवेज यू वुड नो इफ यू. वैसे ही एक एरिया जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ जिसमें आ सकता है प्रीलिम्स से क्वेश्चन इन द नेक्स्ट ईयर इज ऑल्सो ऑफ द सेंट्रल एशियन रीजन. आपको कुछ नहीं पता, आपको वो बोलेगा ना कि कंट्रीज बता दो सेंट्रल एशिया में कौन सी है. That is, for example, they can ask you this question also there, that which of these countries are landlocked countries in Central Asia. Right? So yeah, I mean because that's strategically also important for India. India has a connect Central Asia policy also, जो आप obviously पढ़ी लेंगे वो जो भी है. So what I'm saying is do that much. It does not mean कि आप अफ्रीका का मैप उठा के बैठ गए आज तो पढ़ ही देना है. Okay, so that is not the approach. Now, so when you see the African map, you see Africa's neighbor is Libya. And Libya and Egypt both were involved in this battle. Where on the one side, Egypt was where was the presence of Britain, and Egypt also had what was the Suez Canal, which is obviously strategically very important, right? So partly Britain's interest was to secure its presence in continue to maintain a strong presence in Egypt and continue to secure the Suez Canal, whereas Italy was trying to establish its colonial presence in Libya. This was a constant battle that actually proved to be a nemesis for Libya. Rather than bleeding Germany from 1941 to 1944 for 3 years, rather than fighting with Germany, what Britain and France chose was to fight not in the European theater, but in the African theater, and taking down Italy. Okay, that is what was their focus. So ऐसा नहीं है कि 1941 to 1944 Britain and France were doing nothing. Rather, they were taking down Mussolini's or Italy's expansion in North Africa. And by 1944, Mussolini had been defeated in North Africa, and you see that even Mussolini's hold over Italy had started to crumble by 1944. And now to Mussolini's rescue comes Hitler. Hitler sends a special mission to rescue Mussolini from Italy. and that is done successfully, and Mussolini is rescued. Later, Hitler sends in an additional force to reinstate Mussolini in Italy in 1944, end of 1944. This is something which is happening. Now, what is there is that after already of 3 or 4 years of war fighting, 3 years as Soviet Union fought alone Germany on the eastern border, you see that, and Mussolini, so by 1944, two things are happening. Mussolini has already been defeated in Italy. And now I'll show you another map where you'll get to see okay, I think that map is not there. But just a second, this also should have another map. Yes. Okay, this does not have that map. I'll show it to you later anyways. But what do you see? So what you see basically is by 1944, Italy has been defeated and there are two players which are left. It is Germany and Japan. Now, after taking over Italy, what happens is, and this is something that you can see, that after taking over Italy, so if there is Britain here, there's France here, there's Germany here, there's the Soviet Union here, and there is Italy here. Once Britain and France, so already Germany and Soviet Union were in a constant battle here. Now Britain and France chose not to open the Western Front or not to push too much with the Western Front, rather to take up Italy. And once they took up Italy, by 1944, already the German forces had been weakened, primarily because in the Battle of Leningrad, in which they suffered a lot of reverses. And now, Britain and France, finally in 1944, Britain landed additional troops on the Western Front, finally in 1944 with the Battle of Normandy, and which was one of the most important battles on the Western Front which was fought. Britain pushed in additional troops, US pushed in troops, and you see, now they are moving in troops from here, they are moving in troops from here, and obviously the Soviet Union is pushing from here. Now that is what results in the defeat of Germany. However, even if Germany was getting defeated, the understanding, and even though all three of them, Britain, France and Soviet Union played an important role in the defeat of Germany, the biggest brunt was borne by Soviet Union. And so when it was clear that Germany was getting defeated, Hitler chose to commit suicide because Stalin, the way Stalin faced, because Hitler had attempted to resend Stalin to Italy and reinstate his fascist regime. Rather, he was publicly hanged by the people there. And so, fearing a similar fate, Hitler decided to kill himself rather than, Mussolini. So in Italy, it was Mussolini who was initially rescued by Hitler, and Hitler tried to reinstate Mussolini in Italy, but this attempt did not succeed. Rather, Mussolini was later publicly hanged in Italy. Fearing a similar fate, you see that Hitler decided to kill himself or committed a suicide. But this is where you also see is the beginning of the Cold War, primarily because Germany now, because as Germany was defeated, Soviet Union moved in its troops in Germany from the eastern side and took over the control of East Germany, even when the British and the French and the US pushed in their troops on the western side and took over the control of West Germany. So that is where you see that as World War II ended, another conflict was seen to be brewing. And that is why you see that Germany was split into two, West and East Germany, by the end of World War II itself. In Japan or in Asia, the war came to an end primarily because by 1944 end, Britain and France and Italy had been defeated. But Japan, even though it was also on a back foot in Asia, primarily because of US involvement in the war, Japan did not surrender. And the Japanese were famous for this, that the Japanese would not surrender. That the idea was simple, was to fight till the end. And if the defeat was imminent, then not to surrender, but to kill themselves. So the Japanese also had this practice. I'm forgetting what its technical name is, but yeah. So this was their whole practice, that they would stab themselves and in one go kill themselves rather than surrender. Okay. So the Japanese were not surrendering, and this was given partly as an explanation for the US bombing of the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki to finally force Japan into a surrender. But there are a few other explanations as well. The other explanation was that as World War II came to an end, the US wanted to also, this was also the first major time that US was testing its Manhattan Project, or the nuclear bomb that it had managed to make. At the same point of time, US wanted to send a message to the Soviet Union that what is happening in Germany is probably not a very nice thing. That it was a message which was being sent off to the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union should not have any ideas, or should not entertain any ideas that it could call the shots in Europe. Okay, and why this is important is because before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks, this was unparalleled in the sense that if anybody had this weapon and the other side did not, then the victory of anybody who possessed nuclear weapons was certain. So to that extent, this was the most defining use of technology here, which would establish the military superiority of US. And if it was a reflection of the military superiority of US, whatever is going to happen in the peace conferences could not be done without US consent. So US use of these weapons in the war was to also provide a statement that any further discussions in the peace conferences would have to be with US approval. And that is why with the development of these weapons, you see that the Soviet Union also quickly embarked on increasing quickly embarked on developing its own nuclear weapons. And by 1949, it managed to make the nuclear weapons. One of the reasons why wars, or why post-World War II wars remained cold or did not get hot, is nuclear weapons, in the sense that if both the sides both the sides had access to nuclear weapons, then that is mad or mutually assured destruction. Something जो आप पढ़ेंगे या nuclear में या IR में, Indian जब आप for example, one of the important topics that you will anyway also talk about is non-proliferation. Okay, that the simple thing is that what had now happened was that deterrence lied in nuclear capability. That if US could dictate the terms because it had access to nuclear weapons, then the Soviet Union needed to equalize. If it could not, then US would dictate the terms and Soviet Union would have to take it. Or the other thing was risking a conflict, and a conflict would usually be in favor of United States because it had the nuclear weapons. And if Soviet Union had the nuclear weapons, it could have an equal say in negotiations. Or equal का मतलब ये नहीं कि exactly equal, but they would have a major say in the negotiations. Also, there was no need to be browbeaten by the United States into submission, because there is, and because in case of outbreak of a conflict also, there is equal availability of the destructive power. So that's also one of the reasons why wars remained cold in the Cold War era. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. So this is all which is happening at this point of time. Now, that much is there. Now, any doubts still here, firstly, that you want to ask, or anything that you want to ask till here? Now, we've only talked till now, okay, we've only...
During World War, Russia was defeated earlier from Japan. So what was that?
Russia was?
Russia has gotten Japan.
Oh, okay, 1904.
What was that?
Whoa, okay. So the 1904 question, so what he's asking is that if Russia had already lost in 1904 to Japan, what was that question about? The 1904 question was predominantly about, again, the issue of Manchuria itself. Okay, and it was not just about Manchuria, but it was also about the islands. And these islands were also a point of discord between Japan and Russia. These are the Saskatchewan. These are another set of islands which are there. That is not a no more point of context. But these islands, I'm forgetting the name, but these were the islands, both Manchuria as well as a group of islands between Japan and Russia. Also was a matter of debate. This was also in news almost a decade earlier. Almost 10 years back also, this was in news. But that was what was the major point of discord. Manchuria, though Japan had managed to grab on to some parts of Manchuria in 1904, and more importantly, Russia's reach in the region was taken out. But the full-scale expansion in Manchuria happened only in 1931. Okay, that was there. Anything else? What caused the we'll talk about that. I mean, what caused the formation of East and West Germany? That is something that we'll talk about in more detail later as a consequence of World War II. That's something that Aram se baat karenge, there are many other factors as well. So that's there. Now, what we broadly talked about here is the causes of World War II and the major events. Okay. Now, let's write that down briefly, and but we'll write about League of Nations के बारे में हमने नहीं लिखा है अभी. That's something that we'll write separately as a question also and compare it with the United Nations. Okay, so that's there. Charge नहीं हो रहा है. So So you can first just write a timeline for the 1930 to the 1940 period. And in fact, even before that, from 1920 to 1940, some of the major events that we have to write about is 1924, 1925 was the Locarno Can somebody tell me what is the final score? I'm just curious.
51 won.
51. Are the
Leading on.
no, not leading. Fine. 51 won by
BJP.
and by Congress 30.
39.
39. So that, I mean, you see that since you got to think about it, that why for 6 days, firstly, why do we have exit polls? If everything has, what is the, these are the questions to think about. Why do you have exit polls? The result has already been sealed, right? You should probably have you can obviously have reporting, but you obviously know that obviously pre-polling these polls are banned. Why? Because that influences the mind of the people, right? Obviously, it may influence the voting pattern. If you know what is happening in one phase, it may influence your voting pattern in the other phase or etc., right? That is why the election commission is banned, right? The pre-voting, exit polls, etc. But why would somebody have post-voting exit polls? Or why would the election commission not ban that? What is the relevance of a post? What do you think is the relevance of a post-voting exit poll? To what soft? I mean, for example, what is going to change in 6 days?
Preparation for celebration.
Preparation for celebration. So, see, that is the question. I mean, this is something that needs to be asked more pointedly. Is that if the exit polls after voting are serving no purpose, what it does is that it already creates a impression. Okay, so that if at all some, you know what? So one of the things what is a democracy based on? A democracy is only based on trust.
52-49.
Pardon?
52-49 next to next.
See, this is what I was saying. There's one person that I follow on Twitter, and he has been, I don't know where do these people get the information from, but he has been saying that constantly from past 3 days. And today also, if you see his tweets, he's saying at 1 o'clock that the counting has not happened, the results are not being declared because the counting process is still on. The leads are nothing reflective of anything, and you will see the fight will go on till the evening. Okay, but from 10 o'clock in the morning, every media house is only saying one thing, that the BJP has won a comfortable majority. Okay, and that is why if you see the vote share, because if BJP's vote share is also increasing, and the Congress vote share is also increasing, and BJP is almost a 49.1% vote share from 47% in the last election. If there's a 2% vote percentage increase, how can then be a seat decrease? So the math has to add up, okay? And if it isn't adding up, one has to look at it more calmly. That does not mean that there is rigging. It does not mean that at all. Because even that is possible. Even with a decline in vote share, you can win more seats. That's also possible. Possibilities are there. But rather than doing that, news channels in India, they've gone to the dogs. Okay, I mean, they're bad. Now, okay. Now, one of the students asking a question, if US has waged a war against Japan, why is Japan now dependent upon USA for military help? Now, this goes into post-World War II. What is happening immediately after that? That's something that we'll talk about later. What happens is that after this, after the US bombing of Japan, US enforces on Japan a constitution by which Japan would not be allowed to have an army again. And that is a fresh drafting of the Japanese constitution. And Japan and US is dictating the terms to Japan in the drafting of this constitution. That is why Japan drafts this pacifist constitution after World War II. And Japan drafts this pacifist constitution after World War II, because of which Japan is not allowed to have an army of its own, and US says that it will provide the military assistance. And why is US saying this? Why is US not, when you see that US is not allowing Japan to have its own military, it reeks of revenge. This reeks of what? World War I. After World War I was done to Germany. Germany was not allowed to have its own military. But there's a big difference. That even when Japan was not allowed to have its own military, US gave extensive aid to the Japanese to reconstruct the Japanese economy, so as to ensure that Germany, the fate that Germany had followed after World War I does not become the fate of Japan. Okay? So, and US pushed in large amounts of aid in Japan, primarily to reconstruct the Japanese economy, tie it to the American economy by the whole globalization and the free market thing. The biggest deterrent between the US and the China war is that US-China bilateral trade is $500 billion. Okay? $500 billion is as good as, I don't know, 5 times India's whole trade with every other country put together. Okay? So, for all wherever the money is, that is why it's considered that आप liberalism में आप IR में बात करेंगे कि the stronger are the economic relations, the better probability of a deterrence to a war is there. So US tightly knitted Japan into an economic relation with itself, provided economic reconstruction aid, and converted Japan and prevented Japan from having a military. And that was primarily to put in a pacifist constitution, ensure Japan does not become a threat to United States, at the same point of time ensure this much development, that it does not become a breeding ground for aggressive, revengeful nationalism. Okay. That's there. And that is something that we talk about. And I don't know, okay, just last one thing. I don't know why, okay, these, you know, if from 8 o'clock in the morning you have counting. This is 4 o'clock. This is not national election. This is 2 states election. And if you would notice, I'm probably very sure that Himachal counting is also, how long did it take? Himachal had 50 seats. It took from 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock till I was here, तब तक तो counting खत्म नहीं हुआ था. So 8 to 2, how long does it take to count? It takes, it takes minutes to count. Okay, it's relatively, but the whole process is, yes, safeguarded, that is there. But there are questions which are to be asked, and there are number of, because the way that's being reported, it's not about what is happening inside, it's about what is happening outside has to be questioned. So that's there. But nonetheless, koi baat nahi.
Sir, I think BJP will also win IPL this time.
Let's write down about the Locarno Treaty. Now, in terms of the Locarno Treaty, Britain France, and Germany entered into Britain, France, and Germany entered into the Locarno Treaty Britain, France, and Germany entered into the Locarno Treaty by which Germany's western border was secured Moreover, Germany gave a commitment to respect its western borders. This was an implicit free pass that left the door open for German expansion eastwards. For German expansion eastwards. In 1931 is Japan's invasion of Manchuria. Japan's invasion of Manchuria. And Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 as Japan sought to further increase industrial production, its search for raw materials and markets drove its expansion towards Asia, Manchuria was annexed, keeping its huge mineral Germany was annexed, keeping its huge mineral base in mind. So Japan's expansion is not just for markets and all, it's also because of aggressive nationalism. For example, Japan gave the call that Asia for Asians. Okay, so that's something which is also happening. However, Japan's territorial aggression was largely unchecked by the League of Nations, The League of Nations took no decisive military steps to tackle Japanese aggression. In 1935, what you see is Italy's invasion of Abyssinia or Ethiopia. Italy's invasion of Abyssinia or Ethiopia as Italy sought to expand its colonial presence in North Africa, Mussolini's steps were weakly criticized by the League of Nations. Was weakly criticized by the League of Nations. This emboldened was weakly criticized by the League of Nations. This emboldened Hitler. This emboldened Hitler, who sought to undo the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. So 1935 onwards, what also started to happen, 1935 onwards, what also started to happen was Hitler started expanding the German army beyond the stated strength of 1 lakh soldiers. started to actively rebuild the German Air Force by 1936. What Hitler is doing is that Hitler remilitarized Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland region. And this is also a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In 1937, okay, one more interesting thing. थोड़ा सा break हो जाए. So one more interesting thing is that if you would see, the problem even with newspapers like Hindu and Express today is actually that they're under so much pressure. They're relatively independent, but they're under so much pressure. For example, a special petition was filed by the non-BJP parties before the counting was to happen in the Supreme Court. Because Gujarat elections are the only second elections where VVAT is finally being used. But the problem with VVAT use is that there's no problem. The point is that according to the Election Commission, only one booth's elections tally can be cross-checked with VVAT. Okay, that's the statement, or that is the Election Commission's regulation. But but what had been demanded in the special petition that was filed in the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court obviously rejected, was that that 25%, they said that 15 to 20% of the booths must be cross-checked with the VVAT. The Supreme Court though rejected this, saying that it cannot interfere with the Election Commission, that it is Election Commission's mandate of what it wants to do. But just to put in some perspective, the current Chief Election Commissioner was the Managing Director of the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation, which is selling GSPC for 20,000 crore loss to ONGC, which is not reported in the newspaper. So GSPC, देखिए 10 साल पहले की कहानी है. ये 10 साल पहले GSPC recorded in Gujarat a discovery of a huge oil block. That is why the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation was formed, which said that it had found huge amount of oil on the coast of Gujarat. Okay, and this was valued extremely high, and then they said that, and that is why the GSPC gave out contracts for exploration, etc. Over the next 10 years, GSPC accumulated debts of 20,000 crores rupees, and now GSPC is being bought over by ONGC. Okay, so this is transferring a bad company's loan, which is a state company, to the central government. Okay, and the director of this was the current Chief Election Commissioner, who is now appointed as the Chief Election Commissioner. So, I mean, if you look at this, you know, if you don't question, then there is an absolute, because the media is not reporting unless and until you go and you know and you look, you'll not know. And that is the sad state of Indian media.
What was the reason to remove Naseem Jaideep?
So he retired. He is not removed. Okay. So that's there. It's very difficult to remove any of the constitutional body that causes a huge furore. So that's there. Now, the next thing to write in 1937 is Japan's invasion of Nanjing in 1937 was an extremely bloody aggression in which more than 3 lakh people were killed. The League of Nations did not take any urgent steps to counter Japanese aggression in the region. By 1938, you see, Germany annexed or united with Austria. This is also a violation, right? Germany looked towards eastward expansion. Germany looked towards eastward expansion and now had expressed the desire to take over the Sudetenland region. The Munich Peace Conference urged Czechoslovakia to hand over the German populated Sudetenland region to Germany. Britain and France claimed that peace had been bought for our times and that Germany would not pursue any further territorial expansion. Germany would not pursue any further territorial expansion. However, in 1938 itself, however, 6 months later, Hitler broke the however 6 months later Hitler broke the Munich Pact, annexed Czechoslovakia. By 1938 also, Germany signed a secret non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union. A secret non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union. And Germany signed a secret non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union, and both agreed to divide Poland, while Germany sought control of Western Poland. While Germany sought control of Western Poland, Soviet Union sought control of Eastern Poland. Let me tell you another interesting fact. In the first half an hour of today's trading session in the stock market, right? Because all this is connected, right? So in the first half an hour of the trading, the Sensex went down by 800 points. If you would have just bought a share then, in the next half an hour, you would have been doubly rich, because the Sensex recovered as soon, because in the first 1 hour, the BJP was trailing and the Sensex crashed like anything. And you see that it recovered as soon as the BJP started to regain its position in a number of other areas. तो देखिए, नौकरी करके पैसा तो बच्चे कमाते हैं. So that is meant for people who don't know how things work. If you are smart, if you know how things work, and you are confident about your understanding, you don't need to lift up anything. घर पे बैठिए, सब हो जाएगा वहीं से. Okay? You'll be as rich as you want to be. Okay? So I know some people who made money in the first 1 hour today. Okay. So they told me 8:30. We are buying shares. You should also. I said I'm not interested. So, and then half an hour later they kaha tha na. It's like so. It's like so. Now, 1939. What happens is that Germany attacked Poland. Germany attacked Poland, and Britain and France declared attack on Germany, citing the territorial aggression on Poland, a member state of the League of Nations. This is the beginning of World War II. Okay, so this is the beginning of World War II. Now, we can write about the war in the theaters or what is happening in the war. Very briefly, कोई आपसे नहीं पूछने वाला है in detail about discuss the events of World War II, so that you have some basic understanding. We'll write that. Events of World War II. We have not written another major portion about League of Nations, causes of World War. That we'll write later. But events of World War II. So please don't read this from anywhere else, especially ये war में क्या हो रहा है. So because nobody is going to ask that. So events of World War II what you see is that we're saying basically that the war began from 1939 and went on till 1945. The war had three major theaters. One is the European theater. The other is the North African theater. And the third is the Asian theater. So these are the three main theaters of the war. In terms of the European theater, we again can divide this into the Western Front and the Eastern Front. See, this is the best way to remember it, okay? Rather than seeing कि एक year में क्या हो रहा है, because that becomes very messy. Because in 1 year there are things happening in West Asia also, in North Africa also, Europe also, and Asia also. So in terms of the Western Front, what you see is that the war broke out firstly on the Western Front, right? The war broke out with Germany using the Blitzkrieg strategy to quickly defeat France, Belgium, and Netherlands by mid 1940. By mid 1940. 1940. So this is 1939 to 1940. This is 1940 to 1941. By 1941, 1940 to 1941, almost for 12 months, Germany and Britain were engaged in Battle of Britain. This is where you see code breaking, all of that is happening because of which Britain was able to ensure that Germany does not. Because and that is where you see who's the mathematician who later get involved with the whole computing thing, right? Who is that computational person? There's also a movie on him, right? Yeah, Alan Turing. Yeah, so Alan Turing was the one who was the British mathematician who helped in setting up the first code-breaking machine. Yeah, and which later was to, obviously be used even for making computers, etc. And there's the movie also, Alan Turing, on that was made.
Alan Matheson Turing, the full name of that person.
Pardon?
Alan Matheson Turing.
That I don't know. So I know only this much that that Alan Turing played a pretty important role in that, and that also eventually got him prize a civilian honor, a military honor, much later after his death, because Turing was being a homosexual, was forced into accepting house imprisonment after this time when he later committed suicide. So that's there. Now, 1940 to 1941, almost for 12 months, Germany and Britain were engaged in the Battle of Britain, which, despite major setbacks, did not see a fall of Britain. Now, we did not see a major fall of, we did not see a fall of Britain. Now, Germany stopped the bombing on the Western Front and opened the Eastern Front. Germany stopped bombing on the Western Front and opened the Eastern Front of the war. And opened the Eastern Front. Everybody's written? So, on the Eastern Front, what you see is that from 1941 to 1944, Germany broke the non-aggression pact. Germany broke the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and attacked the Soviet Union. Despite initial successes, Germany faced stiff resistance. Despite initial successes, Germany faced stiff resistance in the Battle of Leningrad. From where the German decline on the Eastern Front began. German decline on the Eastern Front began. Despite Stalin's repeated requests to reopen and push in additional troops on from the Western Front, despite Stalin's repeated requests to reopen and push in additional troops from the Western Front, Britain and France chose not to do so. This led Stalin to question the honesty of intentions of Western powers and saw this delay in opening of Western Front as a deliberate attempt to weaken the Soviet Union, which was left to bear the brunt of German aggression. On Eastern Front alone. So that's also something that you must know, because we actually talk more about the Western Front. We actually talk more about the European theatre of the war. Now, also writing about the Asian theatre, everybody's written this much? Now, writing about the Asian theatre, we say that 1941, US enforced a naval blockade on oil imports to Japan. Japan saw this as an act of war and a provocation, replying to which Japan saw this as an act of war and a provocation, replying to which it simultaneously bombed US naval bases across Pacific on December 7th, 1941, including the Pearl Harbor attack, in which more than 1,500 US soldiers and civilians were killed. Now, what you see next is 1941 to 1945, US was engaged in a constant battle with Japan to assert naval supremacy in the Pacific region. The Battle of Midway in 1942 saw the Battle of Midway in 1942 saw the Japanese Navy So the Japanese Navy suffer major reverses at the hands of United States. The US adopted an island hopping strategy, hopping strategy to slowly take over the control of strategically important islands in the Pacific region. And with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks in 1945, Japan was forced into a surrender. And finally, the last thing that you are writing for today, after that we'll call off the class, is what we have to write about the North African theatre. Okay. So, I'm leaving a bit early today. So, next class will compensate anyway. So, now, the African theatre or the North African theatre the desert wars between Italy on the one side, the desert wars between Italy on the one side, supported by Germany and Britain and France on the other, supported by Germany supported by Germany and Britain and France on the other side, saw a major conflict over securing the control of Libya and the Suez Canal in Egypt. Mussolini's forces were defeated in North Africa, and this is happening from 1941 to 1944. Mussolini's forces were defeated in North Africa in 1944. He fled from Italy but was brought back later and publicly hanged. Was brought back later and publicly hanged. In 1944, finally, the Western Front in Europe was opened with the Battle of Normandy. And Britain, France, and United States pushed in additional troops. Britain, France, and United States pushed in additional troops through Western Europe and North Africa. Germany was now surrounded by allied powers, both on the Western and Eastern Front, and was forced to surrender, while Hitler committed suicide. So that's what you need to know about the three fronts. What we need to write, and that's where we'll begin in the next class, is about the causes of World War II. Okay, there are a few other things that I'll also talk about, and then about League of Nations, its strengths, its weaknesses, its assessment, and probably a brief comparison with the United Nations also. We'll stop here then. Okay. Any other doubts still here? What is the tally? 72-65. In the morning, it was 122 for BJP. Okay. Which is not happening anyways. No, morning. No, that was not, it is not exit poll. What I'm saying, in morning, they're showing the trends. They're blatantly lying in the sense of showing the trends as 122 projected leads. Nowhere they were 122 projected leads. That's okay.